Thank you, Graham, and good afternoon. As Graham pointed out earlier, I will be presenting the highlights of our 2009 non-consolidated financial statements, which cover the Airport Authority's activities here at YVR. The Airport Authority earns revenue from three main sources. The first source is aeronautical revenue in the form of landing and terminal fees collected to recover the costs related to airline operations. This revenue amounted to $122.3 million in 2009, down from $129 million in 2008. The decline was driven by a 6% decrease in landed weight and a 7% decrease in seating capacity by the airlines in response to the decline in passengers. The second source is non-aeronautical revenue, which includes revenue from concessions such as duty-free stores and car rentals, car parking, and land and terminal rents. Revenue from these sources decreased to $150.2 million in 2009 from $152.1 million in 2008, due mainly to the effect of the passenger decline on concession sales and car parking. Partially offsetting these declines were increases in land and building rents and interest revenue. The third source of revenue is the Airport Improvement Fee, or AIF. The revenue earned from the first two sources is not sufficient to cover both the costs of operating the airport and the airport's capital projects. To fund these capital projects, the Airport Authority collects the AIF. Total revenue earned from the fee in 2009 was $86.5 million, down from $92.6 million in 2008, driven by the decline in passengers. A portion of non-AIF revenue goes towards covering the costs of operating the airport, which includes salaries, wages, and benefits, materials, supplies, and services, payments in lieu of taxes, and insurance. In 2009, these costs increased to $132 million from $129.3 million in 2008. The increase arose mainly from the costs of maintaining the capital projects that came into service during 2008-2009, as described by Don, as well as the cost of preparing for the 2010 Olympic and Paralympic Games. The Airport Authority also uses a portion of its non-AIF revenue to pay ground lease rent to the federal government. The rent expense in the Statement of Operations amounted to $65.6 million in 2008, unchanged from 2009, unchanged from 2008. $65.6 million represents the averaging, as required under accounting guidelines, of the declining fixed rent cash payments over the 4-year period 2006 through 2009. When the total cash needed to pay for capital projects during the year exceeds the amount of cash available after payment of operating costs, ground lease, and interest costs, debt financing is required. The Airport Authority takes a conservative approach to debt levels and strives to achieve a reasonable balance between debt and sources of revenue. Debt carries interest payments, which in 2009 amounts to $32.7 million, up from $31.6 million in 2008, due to an increase in the debt drawn against the Airport Authority's bank facility, which I will describe more fully in a moment. As required under generally accepted accounting principles in the Statement of Operations, the cost of capital projects is spread over the useful life of the projects, as opposed to being recognized as the cash paid each year during the project's construction. This spreading of the cost over the useful life is reflected as amortization on the Statement of Operations. Total amortization in 2009 amounted to $92 million, up from $75.4 million in 2008, reflecting amortization of the capital projects that came into service during 2008 and 2009. In 2008, YVR Airport Services issued common shares to City Infrastructure Investors, or CII, in exchange for 50% ownership of YVRAS. As a result of this transaction, in 2009, the Airport Authority received $6.3 million in dividend revenue. The gain from dividend revenue was partially offset by asset write-downs of $2.1 million, and the loss on fair value, also of $2.1 million, on the Airport Authority's holdings of asset-backed commercial paper, the market for which failed in August 2007, resulting in a national restructuring of these assets and a write-down in value. The net amount of these three items is the $2.1 million that you see here. The total accessory revenue or expenses was $38.8 million in 2009, down from $81.8 million in 2008, due principally to the increased operating costs, amortization, and interest expense associated with completion of the major capital projects and the effect of passenger declines on revenue. When we adjust our excess or revenue or expenses to a cash basis, we add back amortization, which is non-cash expense. In 2009, the Airport Authority generated $131 million of cash flow prior to investment in capital projects, which is made up of the two amounts shown here. $48 million of net cash flow from operations, plus $83 million net of collection costs from the AIF. During 2009, the Airport Authority invested $223.2 million in capital projects. So, as shown here, in order to pay for these capital projects, we used the $131 million, which was not sufficient to cover the capital project costs of $223 million. So, as planned, the Airport Authority drew on its bank facility and incurred $92.2 million of net new borrowings to pay for the balance of capital project costs, leaving the cash position at zero so as to minimize interest costs. The Airport Authority remains well positioned to deal with the recovery from the economic downturn, whatever shape that recovery takes. Management has been actively monitoring the environment and deferring operational costs and capital projects to ensure resources are efficiently utilized and that the Airport Authority's financial strength is maintained. I am confident that the Airport Authority is well positioned to deal with this challenging environment. Thank you.